Hi guys, good to see you again. Missing you like always. A couple more people have called in and said, not called, texted or sent a picture of what they've been doing. And I thought I'd update you on Tristan and Logan. Okay, I heard from Logan first. He sent me a picture of a painting that he made, a beautiful painting. He took up watercolor like we talked about in a previous video, and he made a beautiful winter scene. And he's enjoying his painting so much that his mother ordered him some canvases and some acrylic paints, and he's going to be getting into acrylics as well. Way to go, Logan. Keep it up. You've got a real talent there. Tristan sent me a video, a fun-looking video. He made this blowgun. He and his brother, Garrett, they both had these blowguns. And what they were shooting from their blowguns were little mini marshmallows. It looked like a lot of fun as these marshmallows flew around the house. So way to go, Tristan. You got a physics, mechanics, and weaponry project going on. Don't hurt anybody with your marshmallows. Okay, a little update on this week. Most of you are just about done with math, aren't you? Way to go. Last week, two of my fifth graders on Thursday called me to tell me, Mrs. McGurrin, we finished our math. So fifth graders, they went ahead and did about 7 lessons in 2 days. It was just crazy. I can't believe they did it. Can't wait to see those lessons and see if they did a good job. Okay, we'll see how those were. This is the last week. Yes, I'll be grading one of those at random. I'll choose one of those math lessons to grade. So do a good job on all your work. One more week of science. And a few of you, about 4 or 5, still have to say your Bible memory verse. You don't have many days left for that, right? So you want to get that in this week, and then you'll get full credit for that. Okay, I have a little treat for you. It's kind of a double treat. If you remember our book, Open Windows, that we were reading from, we still have one story left. It's called I Still Think It Was a Miracle, and we didn't get to read that story. And a lot of you, your readers are at school, and you just never got to hear that last story, so I thought we'd share that story. Since I'm going to be reading to you, what you may do when you look on your little checkoff sheet, under the reading assignment for today, you don't have to read another hour. You just go ahead and check off the box for today, and then you can write the title, I Still Think It Was a Miracle, or you can write Mrs. McGurrin read from the reader or something, and that can count for your reading today. So sit back and enjoy today being read too. I Still Think It Was a Miracle. Let me see if our authors, we don't have the author on this page. By Ruth K. Hobbs. She was the lady, if you remember, who compiled the reader and made a lot of the nice stories that are in here. And the little intro says, the teacher had hinted that if Jerry flunked social studies, he might have to repeat the whole grade next year. Oh, I hope that's none of you. Jerry desperately wished for more time to study in the evenings, but he knew of no way to get that. Right now, what he really needed was a miracle. I sure hope we can figure out who the right character is, Jerry exclaimed, boring into his lunch bag for the cookies at the bottom. I'm in desperate need of a couple of big fat A's to elevate my grade in social studies, or I'm gonna flunk it for sure. The other 8th graders settled on the wall along the school drive and immediately began chattering about their latest assignment, the last before the Christmas vacation. I can't see what is so hard about choosing which Bible character in the Christmas story showed the true Christmas spirit, said Leon. Simple matter of elimination. Let's list who it wasn't, and the rest will be easy. It couldn't have been Caesar Augustus. All he did was issue that decree about taxes. We can eliminate Herod, too. Killing all those babies didn't show such a great Christmas spirit. The scribes and the Pharisees, they didn't do anything outstanding. I don't think it was even Jesus, Julia volunteered slowly. Well, that's who I thought it likely was, Jerry exclaimed. He is the one Christmas is about, after all. That's true, but he came to die, and at this point in his life, he didn't do anything but be born. Mr. Ross said we should study what the characters in the story did or said. Jesus didn't do anything yet. Well, then, who does that leave us to choose from? Demanded Matt. The angels, the shepherds, Mary and Joseph, the wise men. That's still 5 people, admitted Leon ruefully. Maybe it won't be as easy as I thought. The purpose of this project, the teacher had said, is for you to discover the true spirit of Christmas and to see if it brings happiness to you. Here's what I want you to do. First, read the Christmas story from Matthew and Luke and list all the characters mentioned. As you read, think carefully about what each person did or said and decide which showed the best and truest Christmas spirit. Then plan a project in which you do something for someone, else that demonstrates that same spirit. Hands began going up all over the room, but Miss Ross ignored them. Sounds like Mrs. McGurrin, right? And finally, make a report telling why you chose your character and explaining what your project was. A few groans were also ignored. Your report will be due in the first social studies period after Christmas vacation. That will be the last period on Monday after New Year's Day. Now, have you any questions? How long does the report have to be? That also sounds like Mrs. McGurrin's class. Can it be an oral report? May we work together if our project takes more than one person? What if we all decide on the same character and try to do the same thing? May we tell each other what character we chose? Can our parents help if we need grown-ups to do the projects? Mr. Ross waited until the questions stopped and answered, Your reports may be oral or written. They should be long enough to show that you discovered the true spirit of Christmas and demonstrated it plainly to someone else. You may talk about the project to anyone you please and get anyone you need to help you, but this is to be a personal project. Pick the character you think showed the true Christmas spirit, and don't let yourself be influenced unduly by what your classmates decide. What if we don't choose the right character, but plan a nice project and give a good report? Asked Jerry. I thought about that, replied Mr. Ross, and I decided to grade you in 4 areas. Choosing the right character will count 100 points. A well-planned and executed project will earn you 100 more. If you have a good report, that will be another 100 points. And if your spirit throughout the assignment passes my inspection, you will be given another 100 points. Jerry's hand shot up. You mean we could earn 4 A's if we do everything perfectly? The teacher nodded. Oh, great! But I'm not sure what you meant by that last point about our spirit throughout the assignment. Me either. Neither am I, nor I. Again, Mr. Ross waited till the room was absolutely quiet. Then he spoke seriously. Class, I didn't plan this project simply to give you something to work on during vacation. You're old enough to stop thinking of Christmas as a time for getting presents or for enjoying a lot of good things to eat. As I said in the beginning, the purpose is for you to experience the true Christmas spirit yourself. Let's say you did choose the right story character, and you planned a good project, and you wrote a good report. If you didn't catch the true spirit of Christmas yourself, in my opinion, you failed. I still don't get it, said Leon. Let me illustrate. Suppose you decide the wise men showed the true Christmas spirit. I'm not saying they did. I'm just using them as an example. So you plan to give gifts to someone like the wise men did. You even give to people who cannot give something in return any more than baby Jesus could. But suppose I hear you griping or perhaps bragging about how much money you spent for those gifts. Maybe you act disgruntled because you didn't get the enthusiastic thanks you thought you deserved. You might act disappointed because you gave more than you got, or grumble because you didn't have time to do everything you planned during the vacation. That would show me that you had completely failed to catch the true spirit of giving. And you would get a 0 on that part of the assignment. Understand? Yes, they finally understood. Now the big question was, which character in the Christmas story showed the true Christmas spirit? I think it was the wise men, declared Leon. Giving is always the main idea around Christmas time. Even worldly people know that. Mr. Ross said he used the wise men only as an example, but I think he was just trying to throw us off the track. Well, I'm sure it wasn't them, said Julia, just as emphatically. Choosing the right character is the most important part of the assignment. He wouldn't have given us any hints like that. Then Sue spoke up. I think the angels played a more important part than we think. They brought the news of Christ's birth to the world. The first thing God did that night was to send the angels to earth with the good news. And practically the last thing Jesus told his disciples was to go into the world and tell the good news. All the gift giving you see every Christmas has nothing to do with the spirit God wants us to have. It seems to me that every Christmas we hear a lot of talk about the Christmas spirit and what it is, said Matt. Here we are wondering again this year. The very fact that we're arguing about it now shows me it probably isn't any of the characters we've always thought about first. Couldn't it have been Joseph? God talked to him in dreams more often than anyone I know of, and Joseph always obeyed whatever God told him to do. Isn't doing the will of God the real Christmas spirit? That's what Jesus did when he came to earth. That's what the angels did when they appeared to the shepherds. That's what the wise men did when they followed the star. Why couldn't obedience be the true Christmas spirit? I disagree, stated Henry in a tone of finality. I think the true spirit of Christmas is love. Jesus came because he loved us, and God so loved the world that he gave his son. The whole Bible, not just the Christmas story, is the story of the love of God and Jesus. But God wasn't one of the characters in the Christmas account, Sue pointed out, and Jesus didn't do anything in the story. As long as we are arguing, I think I could make out a pretty good case for the shepherds, said Tina. The Christmas spirit could be faith. That's what the shepherds showed. Imagine leaving your sheep out there in the country for the wolves to gobble up and going into Bethlehem in the middle of the night. And they didn't have any flashlights or street lights. They must have had a lot of faith in what the angels told them. The only clue they had was that Jesus was in a manger wrapped in swaddling clothes. You think they knocked on people's doors and asked permission to go out into their barn and look into the manger for a newborn baby? Fancy getting people out of bed with such a tale. Or did they just go snooping around in stables without asking permission? Either way would have taken more faith than I would have had. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. So I think the true spirit of Christmas could be faith, just as well as obedience or love. The students laughed. Then Leon asked, Jerry, you haven't said a word. Who do you think showed the true Christmas spirit? Mr. Ross said we shouldn't let ourselves be influenced by others' opinions. To tell the truth, I've not been listening much to all your gabbing. All I've been thinking is that if I can make 4 A's, I won't flunk social studies. Gabbing seems to be all we've accomplished, Leon declared, jumping up from the wall and brushing crumbs from his trousers. He spread his hand and counted off his fingers. Look, one of us thinks it was the wise men, one thinks it was the shepherds, another voted for Joseph, and another for the angels. Giving, obedience, faith, love, telling others the good news. That's 4 people and 5 things that have been suggested. Only one can be right, which means most of us are wrong. We haven't settled a thing, and vacation begins tomorrow. We'll just have to do as Mr. Ross said, Jerry concluded as they all headed for the schoolhouse, each decide for himself. One thing is certain. I've got to hit upon the right character, or there are going to be some unfortunate circumstances occurring on my next report card. After getting off the bus that evening and starting the mile-long walk up the lane, Jerry began thinking seriously. His light-hearted comments about his social studies grades were more true than his classmates realized. Likely, they had forgotten that he had repeated 2nd grade, and they surely never suspected how close he had come to failing several years since. Schoolwork had always been hard for him. He would have had a better chance if his father were living and he had evenings for homework like the other students. As it was, helping his mother on their little country place after she got home from work left not much time for schoolwork. More than that, he often helped his grandparents who lived across the yard. Every Saturday, he went with Grandpa to market to help him set up his stand where he sold the baked goods Grandma made on Friday. Jerry's mind spun back to his social studies problems. The way he had figured it after talking with Mr. Ross several weeks ago, if he didn't jack up that social studies grade, he might not pass the year. Could this assignment be the answer to his recent, rather desperate prayers? 4 A's without having to read any chapters in the text? Without having to look up a dozen unpronounceable words and trying to figure out what they meant in the lesson? Without having to hunt answers to any questions? Without having to do any research in the library? 4 A's that he could earn during vacation without a lick of study. It surely was an answer to prayer. And with that assurance, Jerry suddenly relaxed. Then you will help me figure out who the right character is, he said out loud to the Lord. All that talk at noon today left everyone so mixed up, I may as well forget it. Somehow I still think it must be Jesus. Without him, there even wouldn't be a Christmas. And Jesus did do something. He did do something. He gave himself. That was the spirit of Christmas. Jerry felt like dancing a jig. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Lord. There's 1A all sewed up. Now for the project. How can I give myself to someone? Jerry walked slower. Several fragments of verses ran through his busy mind. Jesus came to save sinners, who gave himself a ransom for all. Of course, Jerry couldn't give himself a ransom for sinners, as Jesus did. But couldn't he somehow give himself to sinners in a different way? Were there any sinners he had contact with? Certainly no one at home or school or church. Even their nearest neighbors 3 miles away were Christians from their own church. The only sinners he really ever talked to much were people at market on Saturdays. At least he guessed they were sinners. Then, just like that, an idea for a project popped into his mind, almost full grown. The Christmas and the New Year season was a hectic time at market. Lots of people could use his help. After Grandpa's produce was carried in and arranged, Grandpa could easily take care of the customers by himself. In fact, market day was the highlight of Grandpa's week, and he preferred waiting on customers himself. Jerry would be free to help anyone he pleased. That's what his project would be. He would give himself as a helper to different people in the market. Old Mr. Brodus, for example, his stall was beside Grandpa's, and he always became flustered when 2 or 3 customers stopped at his stand at the same time. Then there was Mrs. Vashtinsky on the other side. She had trouble with English and often couldn't understand what other customers wanted. And the Elroy sisters always took forever to carry in their things. I could get them set up by myself faster than both of them put together, he planned happily. And there is A number 2, he said with satisfaction. He had already decided to give an oral report. Talking came easy with him. Writing was hard work. He didn't want to jeopardize his grade by trying to write a report. The 4th A posed no problem. He would have no trouble catching the spirit of giving himself to others. Already he could hardly wait to begin. The moment he rounded the last bend toward home and came within sight of his house, he noticed the empty carport. Mother must have had to work late, he mused. Usually she arrived before he got home from school. Grandpa's pickup was in the garage, but no one answered Jerry's knock, nor his call when he stuck his head in the door and hollered, "Grandma!" Crossing the yard to his own house, Jerry couldn't at first explain the feeling of uneasiness that enveloped him. Then it struck him. Friday afternoons, his spry little grandma was always scurrying around the kitchen baking. What could have happened to call her away on Friday? He saw the sheet of paper taped to the refrigerator the moment he entered the kitchen. His mother's usually neat handwriting was an almost illegible scrawl. "Grandma, stroke. Her and Grandpa to hospital. Will come soon." Jerry numbly changed clothes and went about his chores. It wasn't till he was nearly finished gathering Grandpa's eggs that, through his whirling fears about Grandma, another thought smote him. With Grandma in the hospital, there would be no going to the market tomorrow. Maybe not even next week. Jerry stood still and watched 4 A's disappear into the dusty atmosphere of the hen house. It was after dark before Mother brought Grandpa home. When the light shone from the windows across the yard, Jerry ran over. Grandpa had gone to his bedroom and closed the door. As Jerry helped Mother put away the baking things Grandma had been using that morning, she told him all that had happened since Grandpa had called her at work. Now she is lying on the hospital bed, not knowing anything or anyone. The doctors say it will likely be only a short time until she goes to be with the Lord. Now, dear, I'm going to make you a bed here on the couch. Grandpa didn't want to sleep at our place, but I think someone should be here with him. Do you mind? I must go and call Uncle Teddy and Uncle Ralph and Aunt Ella. No, Mother, I'd do anything for Grandpa, said Jerry huskily, swiping at his eyes with the back of a hand. Go on, I'll be all right. The doctors were right. Grandma never returned to the little house among the pines. The day before Christmas, they laid her body to rest in the church cemetery. After the funeral, Uncle Ralph and Uncle Teddy both begged Grandpa to go home with them, at least for a while, maybe until spring. Aunt Ella said she had an empty house trailer in her yard that Grandpa could move into, but he shook his head. I'll have to get used to the place without Grandma sometime. It will be best to begin now. It won't be any easier later. So all the relatives had gone home. Grandpa insisted that Mother go back to her job. I know you need the money. I'll have Jerry and we'll make out fine. So on Monday, Mother had gone to work, and only then did Jerry remember that Christmas had come and gone and he had never once thought about what day it was. He was glad there was still a week of vacation left, for he could hardly bear to think of going back to school and leaving Grandpa alone. Try to keep Grandpa busy and talking, Mother had said to him that first morning before she left for work. All right, but what are we going to do after I start back to school? Asked Jerry. He'll be alone all day till I get home. He doesn't even have a market to look forward to on Saturdays anymore. I've been thinking about that, Mother said. I'm working on an idea. So if you can see him through this week yet, maybe things will change. And Jerry, she continued, laying her hand on his shoulder, remember, I'm praying for you all the time during the day. You know God really can solve all your problems. Turn them over to him. Don't wrestle with them all by yourself. Jerry turned away, unable to reply. Being responsible for Grandpa all week weighed heavily on his mind. Mother's prayers would help, but she didn't know about his social studies problem. He hadn't had time to tell her, and now he wasn't going to worry with her with anything else. And so began the longest and most stressful week Jerry ever remembered. A dozen times a day he would find Grandpa sitting in the middle of a job, looking off into the distance, or sitting in his rocker staring at the floor. And it was his job to keep Grandpa working and talking. Every night before he fell asleep, he tried to plan what they could do the next day. Jobs that he and Grandpa could work at together. Jobs that would take a long time. On Monday, they cleaned the hen house, scattering the litter on the garden. Then they drove to town and got new shavings for the floor and the nests. Jerry even got Grandpa to wash the inside of the windows while he washed the outside, though he nearly froze his hands doing it. On Tuesday, they cleaned out the garage and the basement, carting the junk off to the county dump. On Wednesday, he and Grandpa fixed the fence around the pasture and the garden, checking every post and every board. It was a relief when Grandpa decided to replace several posts and some of the boards. That job took them almost till supper time. Thursday dawned mild and sunny, and at Jerry's suggestion, Grandpa cranked up his tractor and plowed under the chicken manure they had spread on the garden. Then they raked the yard and flower beds of the last of the leaves and tree branches that had blown down. On Friday, a cold rain fell. That meant spending the day indoors. The memory of other Fridays in Grandma's cheery kitchen, with her bustling around and her baking, was almost too much for Jerry. But he put those thoughts aside and asked, "Shall we do the Saturday cleaning, Grandpa? Then tomorrow we can drive to the market and see everyone. Would you like that?" Grandpa looked at Jerry with tears in his eyes. "Jerry, I know your mom told you to keep me busy this week. You really kept me on the jump, and it's been a big help. Yes, I would like to go to the market tomorrow. But I really miss going to the market, but that's something else that is over forever. I guess I would like to go back and tell everyone goodbye." That's the way the week had dragged by. Jerry had been so occupied with Grandpa that only at night did they have time to wrestle with his social studies assignment due next Monday. Perhaps Mr. Ross would let him do his project later. But then what could he do since the market project had fallen through? Why had God handed him those 4 A's so plainly, only to snatch them away? That question was an even heavier burden than his responsibility for Grandpa. But no answer had come, and no idea of how to salvage his social studies grade, until Friday evening at supper. Jerry was so weary, he almost dozed off at the table. Then he heard Mother say, "Well, Father, I've quit my job." He jerked awake, and he and Grandpa both stared. "Oh, Mindy, you didn't have to do that. Don't you think I'm old enough to stay by myself during the day?" Grandpa's attempt at a joke made Jerry feel good. It sounded like Grandpa again. "I've decided to take over Grandma's market baking. With Jerry to help, we can bake a lot more than Grandma did, and I plan to start making jelly and candy, too. In the spring, we'll put out garden things for market. Then we could go 2 or 3 days a week. If you want to be responsible for the selling end of things, I'm sure we'll do all right." The happy moisture in Grandpa's eyes was all the answer Mother needed. I love that picture, the happy moisture. A glimmer of hope sprang up into Jerry's heart. If he had even one day at market, maybe he could help enough people to be able to make some kind of report on Monday. He sat up straighter and tried to speak casually. Do you think it's too late to get some things together to sell at market tomorrow, Mother? Grandpa and I plan to go in to say goodbye. We could stay longer if we had something to sell. Well, now we won't need to go tomorrow, Grandpa interrupted happily. Since I'll be going back like usual, we can just skip one more market day and get back to business next Saturday. I'll need most of the week to learn how Grandma did things, Mother said. Anyway, Jerry, you look about ready to drop. You were almost asleep a minute ago. Why don't you go on upstairs and sleep in your own bed tonight? Tomorrow, take the day off and do as you please. You've had a hard week. School starts Monday and you haven't had any vacation at all. Yes, he's just about worn himself to a frazzle looking after me, Grandpa said with a tremble in his voice. I don't know how I'd have made it this first week if it hadn't been for Jerry. Jerry said goodnight and went upstairs. He sank wearily onto the edge of his bed and began to untie his shoes. Mother's words had lifted the heavy burden of Grandpa from his tired shoulders. He hadn't realized until now what a strain he had been under. He was almost too exhausted to undress. Yes, that burden was gone, but not the problem at school. He had failed in his last attempt to do that social studies assignment before Monday. Only a miracle could change things now. True, he would get 1A for choosing the right character. He was sure of that. What good would 1A do? He would get a 0 in the other 3 parts of the assignment. Even he, poor as he was in math, could figure his head the average that 3 zeros and a 100. Mechanically, he finished getting ready for bed. Then Grandpa's words swept into his mind. I'm going to keep hanging on to the Lord. He'll make everything come out all right. Well, that's what I'm going to do, Jerry resolved. I'm too tired to think anymore. I've done what I could, Lord, so I'll just turn it all over to you. Anyway, how important is flunking social studies, or even failing 8th grade compared to losing Grandma? With that decision, another weight dropped from Jerry's shoulders. He curled up in bed, pulled the blanket over his ear, and sank into dreamless sleep for the first time in 2 weeks. On Monday morning, as he walked down the lane to meet the boss, Jerry planned what he would do when Mr. Ross called him in social studies. First, I'll explain why I chose Jesus as the character who showed the true spirit of Christmas. Then I'll just say that because Grandma died, I couldn't do the project I planned. I'll not even tell them how busy I was with Grandpa. I don't want anyone to pity me. The last period of the day finally rolled around. Mr. Ross called for the reports one by one. The angels, the shepherds, Joseph, and the wise men. Every character they had discussed that day before vacation had been chosen by one or more of the students. The projects they reported were varied and interesting. Everyone seemed to have enjoyed the assignment. Mr. Ross called on Jerry last. He walked to the front of the room and gave a little speech he had planned. As he sat down, Jerry could almost feel the warm sympathy of his classmates flowing around him. All of them had been to Grandma's funeral and understood why he hadn't been able to do the assignment. Leon raised his hand. Mr. Ross, couldn't you give Jerry some extra time to do his project? Well, a long pause. Then Mr. Ross said, how about taking up the question after class? If everyone agrees to your suggestion, Leon, I'll consider the possibility. Right now, I want to discuss some of your projects so you will understand more clearly the grades I will be giving you. You'll be glad to know I'm giving each of you 100 for your attitudes toward the assignment. Obviously, you put your hearts into it and enjoyed your projects. For the most part, your reports were pretty good. However, here Mr. Ross paused and smiled kindly, only one of you selected the right character. Jerry, will you tell us again why you chose Jesus? I thought the true spirit of Christmas was not just giving gifts as the wise men did, but giving yourself as Jesus did. Although he didn't do or say anything on that first Christmas day, his being there in the manger showed he truly gave himself. That's what I thought, anyhow. Mr. Ross nodded, then said, now, will you tell us about the project you had planned? So Jerry explained how he had wanted to go to the market with Grandpa and give himself as a helper to anyone who needed him. One more question. What did you do all last week after your grandmother's funeral? You mean, what did I do every day? Well, yes, as much as you can remember. And Jerry began. Mother said I was supposed to try to keep Grandpa occupied while she was at work so he wouldn't be sitting around and thinking about Grandma. So that's what I tried to do. Then he launched into a day-by-day rehearsal of that long, nerve-wracking week. "I see you were quite busy," said Mr. Ross when he finished. "Too bad you had to waste all that time when you could have been working on your social studies assignment. 4 A's would have done quite a bit for your grade, you know." Jerry looked up in surprise. That remark did not sound like Mr. Ross at all. "No, Mr. Ross," he said quietly, "that's not the way I felt about it at all. Of course, flunking social studies isn't fun, but I wanted to help Grandpa. I'd have done more than that for him, grades or no grades." At that, Mr. Ross stood up behind the desk. "That's all I wanted to hear you say, Jerry." He turned to the class. "It's nearly bell time. If you think over the requirements of the assignment and consider what Jerry has just told us, I am sure you'll agree he is the only one who deserves an A in all 4 parts of the assignment." He smiled at Jerry's dumbfounded look. "Yes, Jerry, you chose the right character, and you picked the right Christmas spirit. I gave you 1 A for that. Though you didn't knowingly plan to, you gave yourself to your grandpa all week in a beautiful expression of that spirit. That got you the 2nd A. Your description of how you spent last week was an excellent oral report, a number 3. I apologizing for making that heartless remark a minute ago, but I needed to make sure of your attitude. Your answer earned you the 4th A. Someone started to clap, and the dismissal bell shrilled in the middle of the roar that went up from Jerry's classmates. 8th grade headed for the door. "Come on, old pal," Leon clapped Jerry on the shoulder. "Collect your wits or you'll miss the bus. Don't let those 4 A's go to your head." And he went out. But Jerry turned to the teacher's desk. "Mr. Ross, I just want to thank you for the miracle." "It wasn't really a miracle, Jerry," replied his teacher. "Giving yourself to others, the true spirit of Christmas, has its own built-in rewards. Sometimes those rewards are great, and sometimes they're small, but they're always there. That's the way God planned it." The bus driver tooted his horn and Jerry turned to go. "I still think it was a miracle," he said. "One I hope I'll never forget." Well, I hope you enjoyed that. A couple of you had mentioned after I read the Lord of the Rings passage that you'd like another reading. So there you go. It's kind of a long one, and that'll count for your reading for today. So be a blessing where you are. Work hard. Try and make all of your attitudes and your spirit and your actions pleasing to God today. Do something special for Jesus too. Miss you guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.